Good morning, everyone. Welcome for another edition of our World Jewish Travel. I would like to welcome you for today's talk on the Jews of Italy. Hopefully, it will lead to someone drinking some delicious bottles of wine at lunch today. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Miriam, who will teach us a little bit about our heritage in Italy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm very, very grateful also to Dora and Sebastian from Kesher for making this connection. I'm talking to you from my mother's home in Jerusalem, where I am right now. I've been spending most of the year in Jerusalem now because I'm in a program to become a rabbi. So I'm attending yeshiva here. It's one of the very first Orthodox programs in the world that gives smicha, rabbinic ordination, to both men and women. So I've been living in Jerusalem on and off now for the last few years, while continuing my work in Italy, Hungary, Switzerland, Germany, whatever work takes me, Austria, France, whatever, all over Europe, and not only, as mostly as a theater director. Sometimes I'm also a singer, an actress, I write. Everything that I do is around Jewish culture, Jewish theater, Jewish music, and I hope to share some of my personal journey as well. Um, Something I would like to say is that I will leave space and time for questions and comments at the end of this talk. But I'm also extremely, extremely happy to have sort of like an interactive, um, whatever we want to call it, lecture meeting. So if at any point you want to share or interrupt, ask something, feel free to do so. So you don't need to wait until the end because like we don't know each other. I don't know who you guys are. You don't know me yet. So I think it would also be just very nice to, see everyone's faces and hear everyone's voices. And I'm very happy to get comments and questions also as I go. So this might be different than what you usually do, but feel free to do it with me. Um, um, uh, right. So I will start just by explaining what you just heard, those of you who were already listening. So, mm, okay, just to start a little bit interactive, who recognized the song, the text? What was it? Maybe you got some words or like a line, something. Anyone? Um, all right. So this was a psalm. It was a chapter from Tehillim. It is called Betzet Israel, and this is a psalm that we usually sing. I mean, it's mostly associated with Pesach, although it is part of the Jewish liturgy also on other holidays. It's part of the Hallel service, which is sung not only on Pesach but on other holidays as well, such as Sukkot, Shavuot, Hanukkah, Rosh Chodesh. So it's actually something that we sing many times during the year, but it is most widely associated with Pesach because on Pesach it is not only sung in the shul, in the synagogue, but also at table for, let's say, the last part of the first part of the Seder. So it's right before the food, just to understand what we mean. Which is also the reason why maybe not everyone always pays attention to it because it's right before the food. So it's Psalm 114. And the melody that I shared is, of course, an Italian melody. It's like the most known Italian melody for Psalms, for this specific Psalm. And I would say it's the most widely known and popular melody for Psalm in general in the Italian traditional. This was me singing with two friends. One was also playing the guitar here in Jerusalem, Elchanan Miller and Yoel Meshi. The tune is about 500 years old, probably. It dates from the Renaissance, as maybe some of you could even hear through the harmonies and everything. Um, and it is supposed to be from a city called Ferrara, of the most famous films about Italian Jewry, a film that won an Oscar, The Garden of the Finzi Contini, is set in Ferrara, and the movie is taken and based on a very popular novel written by an Italian Jewish writer called Giorgio Bassani. The story tells the book and the film tells the story of an Italian Jewish family from the first few years of the 20th century until the tragic end during the Holocaust. The film sort of goes in places where the book does not go, so until the very end. I hope that we will have time to share a very small fragment of the movie as well. Or actually, why don't we just start with that? And I mean, I love to change the order in which I do things from time to time, anyways. So let me do this right now. Yes. I mean, I guess maybe some of you might even be familiar with the movie. I don't know. It's again the clip is on YouTube. Tube is very easy to watch. I'm gonna share it in a second.
Cosa vuol dire uno? Uno è Dio che in cielo sta. Chi sapesse, chi intendesse cosa vuol dire due, due tavole di Mosè. Uno fu, uno è, uno sempre, uno sarà. Uno è Dio che in cielo sta. Chi sapesse, chi intendesse cosa vuol dire tre. Tre padri nostri sono Abramo, Isacco e Giacobbe, due tavole di Mosè, uno fu, uno è, uno sempre, uno sarà, uno è Dio che in cielo sta. Chi sapesse, chi intendesse cosa vuol dire quattro madri di Israele, Sara, Ricca, Rachele,
Pronto?
I nostri sono Abramo, Isacco
Pronto?
e Giacobbe, due tavole di Mosè, uno fu, uno è, uno sempre, uno sarà, uno è Dio che in cielo sta. Chi sapesse, chi intendesse cosa vuol dire cinque.
Pronto?
Libri della Torah,
Pronto?
quattro madri di Israele,
Ma chi è?
Ricca, che ha. Tre padri nostri sono Abramo, Isacco e Giacobbe, due tavole di Mosè, uno fu, uno è, uno sempre, uno
Chi
sarà,
era? Nessuno.
uno è Dio che in cielo sta.
Okay, so I'm going to pause this here. You're very welcome to watch the entire movie if, you know, after today you feel like you're more curious to know things about Italian Jewish history. The movie is completely available on YouTube, maybe also with English subtitles, not with Hebrew subtitles like the clip that I showed you. So what was the song in the clip? Don't be shy.
Echad Miodea.
Yes, Judy. It was Chi sapesse chi intendesse, which is the Italian for Echad mi yodea. One of the very last songs that we sing during the Seder Pesach. We're also very close to Pesach now. It's the next big holiday coming up. So I think, you know, but meeting between Purim, which just was, and Pesach that is approaching is perfect to show this. I also want to share some Purim song as well. So what happens in a way is the end of the story that I'm going to tell tonight. Because what happens is that there is this family, the Finzi Contini, which is a almost aristocratic, very wealthy family, very well introduced in the urban tissue of Ferrara, quite a small city, not a major city in northeast center Italy. And what happens, you could see on this in the scene on this table, a very well-off middle-class family, right? You saw that everything was very wealthy and precious, and people were well-dressed, not particularly observant. They don't seem, you know, like very firm Jews, and yet very traditional and very attached to their Seder traditions and to their Pesach traditions. And what happens is that these phone calls that they keep receiving are actually members of the fascist party that are trying to intimidate them, bother them, disturb them, darfkan the day of their holiday. Like they know that they're celebrating Passover, and therefore they try and intimidate them. These are the very, very early stages of the anti-Jewish persecution during fascist time. But so this is where it plays in the film. Why do I say that this is the end of the story? Because the story that I'm going to tell starts 2,000 years earlier, and it is a very long one, and it is a love of, a story of love and hatred and peaceful relationships, difficult relationships, and many ups and downs. So let's begin. And again, I do encourage you to feel free to interrupt and ask clarifications and anything you want me to go deeper in. The story is long. We won't have time to, stop and pause on everything. So again, you're very welcome to let me know what you're mostly interested in. I do have a small, PowerPoint presentation, but this is just like a little guide. Like it doesn't need to be the main source of what we do here. Anyways, I am going to share it. Okay. So usually I call my talk, wait, let me move this one here. Yes. So usually the name I give to my presentation is One Womb, Two Nations, Many Souls. This is also the name of a play which I wrote and performed together with other artists about 12 years ago for the anniversary of the reunification of Italy in 1861. So we were commissioned, we were asked to produce a theater show about the history of Jews in Italy, especially during the struggles and the battles and the wars to unify Italy and to make it its own nation in the second half of the 19th century. But again, I thought that this story begins much, much, much earlier. And the reason for my title is that, as you can see in the picture that I'm sharing, I felt, maybe also because of being a woman, and of course because of my studies in Judaism and Tanakh and Bible, I felt like this image, this very feminine image that you're looking at of Rebecca, the second matriarch, the wife of Isaac, giving birth to these twins, to these two brothers, Jacob, Yaakov, and Esau, was something that was really giving me a lot of inspiration and ideas for this show. The womb, of course, it's Rebecca's womb, but in a way, it's also a metaphor for the Italian land, which has been nourishing and growing both Jacob, which we know from the Jewish sources, the Jewish tradition, that is called also Israel. Like Jacob's second name, the name that he receives after fighting with the angel, is Israel. So it was, of course, always identified with the Jewish people, the Jewish nation. But what happens is that his twin brother Esau, is also identified with the other. So it has in turn being identified by the rabbis in the Midrash, in the Jewish traditional interpretation of biblical texts, with Babylon, with the Romans, and then with the Christians. So to say, always with the enemy, with the other. So this image of these two baby twins stuck in the same space, in the same womb, that is in a way nourishing them, but also keeping them stuck together so that they fight each other while sharing the same space, is something that I find very meaningful when I think of the history of Italian Jews, which are at the same time very, very, very Italian and very, very Jewish, which is something completely different than, for example, Jews in other parts of Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Central Europe, in Poland, in Hungary, in Russia, where somehow they were always, always, always perceived as much more foreign and stranger and different. Italian Jews were so Italian that it was really hard at times to tell them apart from their Christian counterpart. And again, this is how I want to start, with this idea of these two baby nations stuck in the same rechem, in the same womb, in the same mother's belly. So with these twins we go. This is just a quote from Genesis 25, chapter 25 of Sefer Bereshit. And here we have Rebecca, the matriarch, that is actually feeling these two yet to be born babies that are already fighting each other in her belly. And so she goes and talks to God. This is actually, by the way, the first time ever in the Bible that a woman is confronting God, and she demands that God gives her an explanation of what she feels in her body. And as you can see, the Lord answered her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 separate peoples shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So this is like kind of the prophecy by which Rebecca learns that she will have Jacob and Esau, and there will be 2 different people parting from her. This is just another Flemish painting of the same story that we're telling. And here is where our bigger history begins. This is the destruction of the Second Temple of Jerusalem in the year 70 AD or CE, Common Era. And as you can see, it's a very, very, very tragic moment and picture. You can see the big candelabra here that is taken away, and it will reappear soon. We will see where. So, of course, this is one of the most tragic moments of all Jewish history ever, the 9th of Av of the year 70 AD. And this is the day in which, in a way, Jewish history detaches itself from Jerusalem and reappears in Rome. According to rabbinic tradition, the Messiah, the Redeemer, is born on the day of the destruction of the temple and is now sitting at the gates of Rome. There is a very famous and beautiful story, a midrash in the Babylonian Talmud, in the Tractate of Sanhedrin, page 98, in which a famous rabbi goes to see the Messiah and asks him where the Messiah will come. And the Messiah tells him, I will come today. And this today is an eternal today, is always coming today. So what is special for our story in this midrash is that the Messiah is sitting at the gate of Karta. Karta in Aramaic is the city. So the most important city of the time is Rome. Rome is considered to be the place of all tuma, of all impurity, of everything that is evil and bad and against Jerusalem. And this is precisely and specifically where the Messiah sits. Not in the good place, but in the very, very middle of the worst of idolatry, of everything bad. So from that day on, the very close relationship between these 2 cities, Jerusalem and Rome, which share so much and also have so many things that divide them, is a very, very strong bond. And Italian Jews are the ones who embodied this. So this is a famous sculpture or a part of a sculpture on the Ark of Titus. So in the year 70 AD, Titus, the emperor, the newly appointed emperor, before it was a general, spoils the temple and brings the spoils to Rome, along with many Jewish slaves and prisoners and all sorts of people who come with him from what now will become Palestine. So I'm sure that most of you are familiar with this image of the menorah, the 7 branch candelabra that is taken and brought to Rome. Of course, we know that this menorah is actually lost, but the image that we have is on this ark, which is still in Rome, the Arch of Titus in Rome. Actually, though, the presence of the Jews in Rome, in ancient Rome, is actually even earlier than that, because Horatio, probably the most famous poet of Rome, the most famous Latin poet of all times, who, as you can see, was died before the year 70. He died in 65 AD. So he writes in one of his very famous satirical poems, he writes something about a person, a man who is stalking him, who is following him around town. And what he tells this person mockingly in order to try and get rid of him is, what, are you a Jew? And is today the Sabbath? That's a rhetorical question, meaning, don't you have anything to do than come after me and annoy me and waste my time? And the idea, the image that Horatio, or the character of the poet rather, uses to mock this person, to make fun of him, is, what are you, a Jew who has nothing to do because today is the Sabbath? Which of course teaches us that not only there were Jews in Rome during that time period, but also that at least people as learned as Horatio and his readership knew about the most important Jewish custom and practice, because it could rely on the fact that his audience would actually get the reference and laugh about it. So as we know from any stand-up comedian of all times, in order for your skit to be funny, people need to understand what you're talking about. So by the fact that he writes about Shabbat, about Shabbos, we understand that he is confident that most of his readership will understand what that is. This I'm going to skip. It's just a tiny thing of why the Romans don't like the Jews. First of all, because for them it's very weird that Jews do not represent in any way or visualize with any image their God, and also that they have only one God instead of many. They hate the idea of circumcision, like Romans as well as the Greek people are obsessed with the perfection of the body and the Olympic Games and all the gym places and races and everything. So the idea that someone will willingly harm his perfect body is completely crazy for them. As I already mentioned, they hate the idea of someone resting on the Sabbath, because this is a society which is entirely built of a very small minority of people not working ever any day of the week, and a multitude of slaves and servants who are constantly working 24/7. So the idea of equality that the Shabbat brings into the world, that everyone works and everyone rests, is completely alien to the Roman culture, and is very threatening and dangerous, because the minute the servants and the slaves will start to demand Shabbos, it will be over. The last thing that really bothers the Romans when they think about Jewish practice and custom is the idea of not eating swine, of not eating pork, pig, which was and still is today one of the most important foods of the Italian cuisine. So that is crazy for them not to eat pork. If we skip a little bit forward, this is a map of what Italy looks like, southern Italy looks like in the 9th century AD, as you can see. So now I'm only showing you the very, very, south of the Italian booth, because this is where most Jews spread. Here is Rome, as you can see. It's the top northwest of our map, of the map we're looking at. There are very few Jews any north than Rome at this time, which is why I'm showing you this one map. Most Jews are concentrated around the areas which today are Naples, which you can see here, Salerno, a few cities that still exist, Eboli, all the Apulia coast, Bari, Brindisi, Gallipoli, Taranto. These are all places that still exist. Of course, the green thing that you see here is Sicily, and this is Calabria. So these are all the regions of southern Italy. This is where the Jews arrive. Some of them, as I said, already come from Rome. Many of them come from Jerusalem, spread through Rome, go back south. But what is very interesting is that at this point, there are also Jews who are coming directly from Asia Minor, even from Babylon, from Babel. So according to a leading contemporary Jewish historian, Anna Foa, this area specifically, what I'm showing now on the map, the very, very, heel of the boot, this is where the two Talmudic traditions meet. So the Talmud that comes from Jerusalem, the Palestinian Talmud, and the Babylonian Talmud, this is where they meet. This is where all the rabbis and writers of the Talmud meet, and for a good 2 centuries lived together. We will see a little more about the history of these places. This is a very famous landmark of Jewish life in Syracuse, in Sicily, so in the island. I assume some of you know what a mikveh is. It is a ritual bath. It is used to purify the bodies, especially female bodies. Women go and immerse in the mikveh every month at the end of the cycle. So this mikveh was built in Sicily and was in use in the years that you can see. So for almost 1,000 years, for 900 years, 535 until 1493. What happens in 1493? It was abandoned because all the Jews were expelled from Sicily, from Naples, from all this area that I just showed you, as well as from Spain and Portugal. with the expulsion of Jews from Spain, Jews were also expelled from this entire area of Italy, which was under the same kingdom, the Spanish kingdom. But there are still many things that are left as a proof of their presence. So this is, for example, also in Syracuse in Sicily. This is where the mikveh was and the synagogue, which was nearby. And you can see on this small map, I don't know if you can see, I can try and enlarge it a bit, maybe, or not. No, I can't, sorry. So you can see here the synagogue site, the mikveh, Via Giudecca, like the Jewish street. And there are a few vicolos, so a few tiny alley or smaller streets that are all called Giudecca Primo, Giudecca Secondo, Giudecca Terzo, first, second, third. So this was all the Jewish area of this city, which is actually very beautiful. You can see some of the pictures and the way it looks today. So like in many other places in the world, I'm thinking of Paris or Budapest or Berlin, what was the Jewish area is actually one of the most hipster, touristic, fancy places of today. Really, I'm thinking of the Marais in Paris and many other areas, the Lower East Side in Manhattan, many. This is also a picture from there. And this is before, the whole touristic discovery of the Jewish heritage. This is another place. Now we're back to the land, to the mainland, Puglia. This is a famous rabbi called Shabbatai ben Avraham Donnolo, which was not only a rabbi, but he was a physician, a doctor. You can see here Il Medico. And actually, this is a plaque or a little something sculpture that was donated in his honor and in his memory by the League of the Pharmacists, in honor of this person and his merits as what today we would call a pharmacist. You can see here that this was put on exactly 10 years ago in 2013. So the story with this guy is that he resuscitated a young boy. So if you Google Golem and Oria, I don't know, some of you might be familiar with the story of the Golem. And here is the reason why I put this little golem picture here. Basically, there was a boy that died of some disease or some accident, and the mother brought the boy, the dead body of the boy, to this famous Rabbi Donnolo, and Donnolo resuscitated him. And this story was transcribed and remembered as the Golem of Oria. So it's not the Golem like the Golem of Prague, where the Maharal is building a man from earth and dust. This is a golem in the sense that the boy was dead and he made him come back to life, which echoes a story in the Tanakh, in the book of Samuel, Shmuel. There was still something I wanted to show you from Aria, but I don't have it in the presentation. So let me see your faces for 1 second. And I will take this an opportunity for a small pause, and you can ask me questions if you like, or anything that you want me to go more into details about. No, nothing. Okay, fine. So let me find.
Actually, I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
It's not so much about history; it's about the present. Sure. Are there still active synagogues in Italy, and where would they be found?
In all over Italy, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me try and answer that briefly, and then we'll go back to the history. So yes, today there are about 35,000 Jews in Italy. It's actually very good that you asked this now, because the story really begins with the Girush, with the expulsion. So following the expulsion of Jews from southern Italy, as well as from Spain and Portugal, there are almost no Jewish communities anywhere southern than Rome. There is today a tiny community in Naples, in Napoli. There is also a Chabad family that lives there. So there are maybe like a few, less than 100 Jewish people that live in Naples today, but that's as south as it goes. So all the places that I was now showing you, Puglia, Sicily, that area, I mean, you can never say that there are no Jews, because I myself know Jewish families both in Sicily and in Puglia, but we're really talking about like individuals and maybe, one person, his wife and one son, like, this extent. Although there are today sorts of like experiments and people who are trying to rebuild communities, but as far as actual places, shul, synagogues go, the majority is either in Rome, the capital, or in Milan, which is where I grew up. These are the two major cities. So Rome today counts about 16,000 Jews, and it has about 12, 13, 15 minyanim. So it can be synagogues, like, like a real building, or just a room where people gather and daven. But they say that it's about 12, 15 minyanim in Rome, and the same amount in Milan. Milan counts about 7,000 Jews, 8,000, depending, like in many other communities, you have unaffiliated Jews who don't count, and you have people who are in the registers but don't show up. So in the end, it balances out. What is very important to keep in mind when thinking about North America is that the main difference is that Italy is the place where Reformed Judaism never happened, which means that all Italian Jewish communities are formally Orthodox on paper, which does not mean that people are Orthodox as, when we think of Orthodox Jews, or here in Israel, or, it just means that if you go to a synagogue, you always have a man rabbi. There are no musical instruments being played. The food is kosher. The whole service is in Hebrew. I don't know, like the major, sort of things that distinguish the Orthodox community from any other stream of Judaism. It does not mean that most of the community is observant, if you understand what I mean.
Got it.
Right? People might drive their car to shul, but then when they come to shul, they will freak out if there is a woman there leading the service. That does not happen. All right. And they do not count women in the minyan and blah, blah, blah. This, of course, I'm telling because I'm here learning to become a rabbi. So for me, this is super relevant, and it's part of, what's happening in my life right now, and makes it hard for me to live there right now and all of that. But, this is more me. So again, today, functioning synagogues you have in Rome and Milan, where you even have a choice. And also what I said about the Reform movement is not 100% accurate, because for the last 12, 15 years, there have been progressive communities that sort of like unify and keep together everything that is not Orthodox. So everything that goes from conservative to progressive, Reformed, renewal, everything that is not Orthodox comes together in Rome, Milan, Florence, and Bologna. So there are 4 non-Orthodox communities in Italy today, but they're not recognized by the Union of Jewish Communities, which, again, if we skip forward in history, what happens is that during the time of Mussolini, during the time of right before the racial loads of fascism, the fascist party made an agreement with the Catholic Church. This is another story, but relationships between the Catholic Church and the state had been very rough from 1870 until 1930s, so for about 60 years, following the conquer of Rome and the unification of Rome to the Italian state, which meant that the Pope did not own Rome anymore. So following the sort of like peace and settling between the church and the state, excuse me, there was also a treaty that was made between the Jewish communities and the Italian state. And this was the first time ever. So this happened in 1930. And what happens is that the status quo, whoever was considered to be the Jewish communities at that time, had this sort of agreement with the Italian state, which then, of course, was completely turned upside down during Mussolini, during fascism, during World War II. When the war ended and Italy was liberated and democracy came back and everything, basically they went back to that agreement, which was again confirmed in the 80s. So that's part of the story that I remember, late 80s, which meant that until today, the only Jewish group which is represented how to say, in front of the state, is the union of the Jewish community, of the Orthodox Jewish communities. Whoever came after that exists, but is not acknowledged. It means that they don't have any rights with the state. They do not get any money from public funding and taxes and everything. So the situation for these non-Orthodox communities is very, very rough. They barely have money to fly in a rabbi once every 2 weeks or something. And also there are no schools or institutions where non-Orthodox rabbis can be trained. So right now, these communities, which I mentioned, in Rome and Florence and Milan, they have to fly in a rabbi if they want one, usually from England or France or Germany. I mean, of course, there is also the issue of languages. But right now, unfortunately, there is no Italian-speaking Reformed rabbi that can serve in a Reformed community in Italy. So again, I grew up in an Orthodox family and in an Orthodox community, but I did have, some interactions with the Reformed communities, and it's a very hard life they live because they are also not part of that circuit of Jewish communities. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. I mean, of course, I'm happy to talk more about the contemporary situation, but there are synagogues that function in Turin, in Venice, and other parts of northern Italy, but it's mostly central and northern Italy where you can find the minyan.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Any other questions? Okay, so I wanted to share with you, since we're talking about Dafka, this place in southern, I'm sorry that my voice is going very bad. Oh, okay, here. This is what I wanted to share. Okay, so what happens is that I was invited with my band exactly in the place that I just showed you, the very last place I showed you, Oria in Puglia, with the guy, the rabbi who resuscitated the boy. There was a very special festival they did at the end of September last year, and we were playing there. So this is just a tiny bit from our sound check. And I just wanted to show you the beautiful square of this town with Jewish music playing there about, like over more than 600 years after there'd been no Jews there ever. So it was a very special moment for me to be playing their music with my band. Yes. So this is a project that I started 10 years ago, which is called Cafe Odessa. We do klezmer music, Italian Jewish music, Sephardic music, Ladino, Israeli, all sorts of things. But this was a very special moment when we played in this town of Oria. And now let's go back to our presentation. Okay, here we go. So speaking of musicians and klezmorim, we moved north. So as I said, there are almost no more Jews at this point in southern Italy. But we do find a very important and strong Jewish presence in the north. So here of course, everyone knows about Venice, Venezia, because it's such a special and unique and crazy place. I hope that many of you have been to Venice or will go to Venice one time, at least in your life. It's worth being there. So Venice becomes, towards the end of the 15th century and the 16th century, a very big center for Jewish culture. Among many, many, many other people, intellectuals and artists who come to Venice is this fellow that comes from Germany, from Nuremberg, and his name is Elia Levita in Italian, or Elia Bocher in Yiddish. He is a man, a young man, a young bachelor, a scholar, a grammarian, a poet, who leaves the harsh conditions of Jewish life in southern Germany and settles in Venice and Padua also, so in the Venetian region of northern eastern Italy. Here you have his dates, 1469, 1549. So he lives in the ghetto in Venice and writes all sorts of things. What he's mostly known for is the Bovenbuch, which is the very first and most popular chivalric romance written in Yiddish. So he writes a cycle, like a knight's romance, like King Arthur or King Charles or all of these stories, but he adapts it to Yiddish. He writes it in Yiddish, in or what is today known as early Western Yiddish. And he adapts everything that happens in this very Christian story, weddings, funerals, births, and everything, to Jewish tradition. So babies are born uncircumcised, and people get married under a chuppah, and so on and so forth. And all these characters speak Yiddish, and no one is praying to the Madonna or to the saints, but to, the Almighty God. I happened to be part of a wild, crazy production where we acted out and put on stage some of this material in 2016, and this was a celebration of 500 years from the establishment of the ghetto in Venice. Not that there was too much to celebrate, but this was something that many organizations around Jewish Europe felt like marking in a way. So this was part of it. Speaking of Pesach, the very first Italian Haggadah was printed, the first printed Haggadah was printed in Venice in 1609. This is an Haggadah that we still use today in my family, by the way, and in many other families. And it has Judeo-Italian writing and commentary. Actually, Judeo-Italian is not an accurate way to express this, because Italian at the time does not even exist. There is Jewish Venetian, Judeo-Venetian, as well as Judeo-Florentine or Judeo-Roman. Italian is not even a language at the time, and will not be for the next 200 years. But all these dialects mixed with Jewish terms and Hebrew grammar and rabbinic expressions from Hebrew, Aramaic, those become what we would call the Yiddish of northern Italy. And of course, as well as much as Yiddish and these languages are written with the Hebrew alphabet. So I don't know how well you can see here. I would like you to be able to see. So all the writings here, for example, what I'm pointing at here and here, everything that is on the sides is actually Venetian, Judeo-Venetian, written with Hebrew characters. And these are all the explanations and the commentaries on the Haggadah. Maybe you can see the bigger parts with the pictures, Rochza, Motzi Matzah, Maror. So these are all the parts of the Seder with beautiful illustrations. And again, this is like the most iconic Haggadah of Italian Jewry, printed in Venice in 1609. The Talmud is also printed in Rome and very quickly burned in Rome and in Venice. Of course, this is a story which is similar to what happened around the same time in France and in Spain, where there were all these disputes against the Talmud, which always resulted on huge burnings of Talmud. And very often it was a Jewish convert, the one who denounced the Talmud, because it was also the people who knew where to find the quotes that would convince the people to burn and to censor the Talmud. But I mean, this is not a story which is typically Italian. This happened all over Europe. Spain is famous for that, France too. This is just a small detail from a painting of one of the most famous and important Italian painters, Piero della Francesca, lived in 1416, 1492. So the same date as the end of Southern Italian Jewry. And the small detail in this bigger fresco is the torture of the Jew. You see, there is this Jew which is cast in a pit, a story that in a way resembles the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis, where the Jew is the Joseph, Yosef in the story is put in a well, in a pit by his brothers. And the Christians always loved to read the story as a prefiguration of Christ. So Joseph in the book of Genesis being cast and in a way betrayed by his brothers is a prefiguration of Jesus be betrayed by his own disciples. Those were 12, these were 12. There are many similarities in the story. Another story of anti-Semitism is the story of San Simonino, Saint Simon, from Trento. Trento is one of the most northern cities. It's almost on the border with Austria. So the story is a typical blood libel, again, also having to do with Passover. With Pesach, Jews were accused of murdering and bleeding a Christian baby, again, like a little Jesus, to bake their matzahs, their bread for Passover. And like in many of these stories, a Christian baby was found dead, maybe for illness, or maybe someone even murdered him in order to accuse the Jewish community. What happened is that the Jewish community was detained, tortured, many of them were put in prison and killed, and they were found, so to speak, guilty of having murdered this innocent Christian little boy in order to bake their matzahs, and the whole Jewish community of Trento was expelled. So what happens is that this is a story like many others, but for some reason, this little boy, Simonino, little Simon, became a saint, and the Christian, the Catholic Church held him as a saint until very, very recently, until after World War II. So there was a day which was supposed to be the day in which he was murdered, that became a Christian holiday for the church, and in which it was celebrated. So what happens is that since 1475, when this story happened, until 1965, which is the date of the end of the Second Vatican Council, where many, many things between the Catholic Church and the Jewish communities, at least in Italy, but in general all over the world, changed for the better. Only in 1965, so 500 years later, the church was willing to abolish this holiday and to declare that the whole story was fake, it never happened, and the Jews were not guilty. So for almost 500 years, the church has been celebrating the day of the martyrdom of this poor innocent Christian baby murdered by the Jews. 2019 was the time when a very big exposition was opened in Trento, in the same city, in the National Museum of Trento, exposing and telling the story of this whole, fake news, we would call it, of this mythology that caused so much harm to the Jews of Italy. So in a way, this was also, finally a step of reconciliation in a way. We go back to the ghetto in Venice. The ghetto in Venice was established in 1516, which makes it the most ancient ghetto in the world. What do we mean by ghetto? Ghetto, some people love to think, but it's not true, that comes from the Hebrew word for divorce, get, meaning it's like a divorce between the Jews and the city. It's a very nice, it's not nice, but it's a fantasy, but it's not true. The actual etymology of the word is getto, which meant a place where metal was worked. So some sort of like goldsmith area, which is exactly where the ghetto was established. So it was just like a geographical indication. And it's a word that then came to mean, of course, many other things. Why do I put an end in 1797 to the ghetto in Venice? Because this is when Napoleon liberated, so to speak, the Jews, opened the gates of the ghetto and conquered Venice, of course. Things did not, become all of a sudden perfect for the Jewish population of Venice, but we like to think that those were the 250 years of the life of the ghetto in Venice. These are a few pictures. It doesn't look very different today than it looked back then. There's some more maps. And this is the German synagogue, which is one of 5. Still today, when you go and visit the Jewish area, the Jewish ghetto in Venice, you can take a tour of the Cinque Scole, the 5 shuls, the 5 synagogues. One of them is the German, and there is a Levantine and Eastern Levantine Scola, the Spanish synagogue, the Italian synagogue, and they are all open to visitors. One of them is used on Shabbat and holidays in the winter, which is easier to warm up, and another one is used in the summer. Shabbat doesn't need air conditioning, so usually there are only 2 that are used, one in the summer and one in the winter, if you go there for liturgical purposes. This is what the Scola Levantina looks like from the outside. This is the one that is used in the summer. These are just a few pictures from the Venice ghetto. As in many other Italian communities, Chabad Lubavitch is taking over. They run an independent community very close to the official one. They have a lot to do with many tourists, Israeli, Americans, whatever. Like, story with Chabad everywhere. Relationships are not great. Here on the right, we see, probably the most famous Venetian Jew, Shylock, famous character of Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. And here we go to Rome, which is the second ghetto to be established in 1555 by Pope Paul IV. He orders for the Jews of Rome to build themselves and be closed inside the ghetto. So this is sort of something that goes back to the biblical story of the Jews in Egypt, where they have to build their own, their own prison in a way. So the Jews first have to pay and then to work, slave, for what will then be their own prison, the ghetto that will close them inside. The life conditions in the ghetto in Rome are much, much, much worse than the one in Venice. Jews in Rome are actually very poor. The only thing they can do is schmatters. They can only deal with rugs and, old clothes and fabric, which is also the reason why until today, most Jews are, I will go back to this. I just wanted to show you something, but no. Most Jews are in the textile and clothing industry and business until today. This is the very big synagogue that is built in Rome at the very end of the 19th century, which is still standing and still in use, and you can visit it. It's on an island in the Isola Tiberina. This, of course, is what Rome is famous for, the fried artichoke, il carciofo alla Giudia, which is one of the most iconic Jewish foods ever. It's just a full artichoke deep fried in oil. Rome today is rich and abundant with kosher restaurants. This is a very famous bakery. It looks as run down as in the picture. It's called Boccione. It's owned by 2 very unpleasant, to be kind to any customer. They're actually very harsh and rough, but that's part of the charm of the place, that you're not treated well. And what they serve is exactly what you see in the picture. So top left is this thing called pizza di boccione. It is called pizza, but it's actually sweet. But pizza in Rome actually means anything flat, any pie, any cake, anything that's, that is baked in a tray. So this is with raisins and almonds and pine nuts and candied fruits, and it needs to be a little burnt, as you see it in the picture. One piece of this lasts, for like a week. Like, it's very, very rich and very dense. And the thing that you have on the bottom on the right is called torta di ricotta e visciole. It's actually my favorite. So it's a cake with ricotta, with soft cheese, and visciole, which is a very tasty version of candied sour cherries. So it's like some sort of cherries that are treated somehow. It's very tasty. It's very good. There is also a non-dairy version with almond paste instead of the ricotta. Anyways, if you ever visit Rome, it's worth going to Boccione for a true Roman experience. And to visit some of the many restaurants. There are many stories with the artichokes. I'm happy to share some later if we have time and if you want me to. This is what the piazza, the square. So the piazza by default is the square of the ghetto for everyone in Rome, not just for the Jews. Piazza by default, by definition, is the square of the ghetto. This is where the school is. You can see the little boys playing ball and the flags. That's where the Jewish school stands. And yeah, it's not very different than it was yesterday. It still looks like this today. Now I want to go to another ghetto, which is the ghetto of the northern eastern city of Mantua, another very pretty small town in northern Italy. And this was the home of the very first Jewish composer to compose music in the style of his time, which, as you can see, is the late Renaissance, early Baroque time in terms of music style, 1570, 1630. What was unique about him is that he took the Psalms from the Tanakh, from the Bible, and composed Christian, so to speak, music for Hebrew text. So he did not use the Latin translation of the Psalms or any other, Italian version of it, but he went directly to the source and used his own tradition, his own knowledge of the Psalms in Hebrew, but dressing them with Italian music. Let's see if I can play a tiny piece for you all. Sorry, one sec. Okay, no, so I will do it actually even better. I will play it from a recording which I have of me playing this with a friend on the guitar. It was in the material that I sent before. Let's see where I have it. Sorry. I have time for more questions if you have any.
We're a quiet group today.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, like in Rome, do most of the kids go to Jewish school, or how does that work?
I wouldn't say it's most of them. In Milan, where I grew up, yes, the Jewish school is much more attended. So most Jewish kids in Milan do go to the Jewish school. In Rome, I feel like for many reasons, the Jews are more part of the city itself. So one of the reasons might be that Jews in Milan were not allowed to reside until 1860. So until 170 years ago, which I know for America might look like a very long time, but for us it's not. Like for Italian standards, this is a very recent community. There was an old Spanish law that the Austrians forgot to remove, whatever, for which there were no Jews in Milan until the end of the 19th century. And for that reason, also Milan does not have a ghetto, does not have a Jewish area. It's all very new. Like Jews started to come to Milan in the, the last years of the 19th century. And then, of course, there was a war and everything. And many Jews are very recent. They mostly came from Iran after, the revolution in the late 70s. And they came from Lebanon and Syria and Egypt and Libya, all the colonies of Italy. So they don't feel very Milanese or very Italian, and they all group in the Jewish school. While Rome, because Jews were there for 2,000 years and the ghetto was such a central presence, they don't feel the need to be in a special place. They feel very Roman, if you understand what I mean. So they do go to the Jewish school, but sometimes just for kindergarten and elementary school, but then they don't feel like they have to stay there for, through middle school or high school. So usually that's the divide.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. So I just want to share this small part of a video, which is another psalm. This is Psalm 137. It was composed by Salomone Rossi, the composer I just mentioned, a Jewish composer from Mantua, who was the court composer of the Gonzaga family. So, as you know, for example, the family that was the kings almost of Florence were the Medici family. You might know maybe from the Netflix series or whatever. So the same thing in Mantua was the Gonzaga family, and Salomone Rossi was the court composer of the Gonzaga family. This is just an arrangement of a madrigal, which has 4 voices. This is just 2 and a guitar. I want to share just a tiny bit of this with you all, if I manage to somehow. Here we go. This was the recent concert we did in Parma last year. Okay. Yes, so this was us. I just want to be mindful of the time. How are we doing? How longer do we have? How many questions and other things you have, so that we aim at ending pretty much on time? Ari, tell me.
I think we're okay on time. Seems like everyone's really engaged. So yeah, I mean, if you want to go on for a little bit longer, then we can open to some Q&A.
Sure. Okay, great. Okay, so let's go on with our, story in whatever order we are doing it. Okay, so this was Salomone Rossi, a tiny bit of what you heard. What is interesting about this psalm that you just heard is that it talks exactly about, this is the famous psalm of On the Rivers of Babylon, right? By the rivers of Babylon, from on the rivers of Babylon. So that is the psalm that talks about the destruction of the temple and the exile to Babylon, to Bavel. And what is interesting is that it says, we cannot sing the songs of the Lord, the songs of Zion, on a foreign land, which in a way is exactly what this guy Salomone Rossi at his time is doing. Is merging, is connecting between the text, which is in Hebrew and which is longing to Zion, and whatever is happening where he lives. You can see here the map. There are other waters. Mantua is a pretty beautiful city, in between rivers and lakes, and very green and pastoral. So in a way, that's exactly what he's doing, is answering the question of the rhetorical question of the psalm. How can we sing detached from our land? We can. Let's move on and see. This is Salomone Rossi. This is what his book came out when looked like when it came out. It was printed in Venezia. Maybe some of you can read here in the Hebrew alphabet, Venezia. And again, he composed and set to music about 22, 23 psalms, all sounding pretty much like the one you heard. I'm gonna skip about this guy because we can't. There were two very important rabbis, Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, and Shadal, Shmuel David Luzzatto, both from the very important Italian Jewish Luzzatto family. One was the 18th century, the second one was the 19th century, and still today they are learned and studied even in yeshivas here in Israel as very important contributors to Jewish cultural, history. This is the synagogue of Mantova, the same city as Salomone Rossi. So his psalms were played and sung exactly in this synagogue that you can see here, which is actually still existing. It's not used for most Shabbats or services, but I was there once on Rosh Hashanah. Sometimes they manage to open it and even have not mamash a minyan, but some people davening there. El caso Mortara is something that I just want to mention quickly. So this was a story that happened in 1851 until 1940. Basically, a Jewish kid, the little boy that you can see here with his tallis, was kidnapped by the Catholic Church in the city of Bologna. Here you can see a painting that represents the story. You can see, of course, the mother is fainting, the father is trying to protect him. What happens is that the boy was baptized secretly by his maid, his babysitter, who was afraid that he would die and go to hell because he was a Jew who had not been baptized. So she baptized him one night when he was very sick and she thought he might die. Then the boy did not die, but killed. And the maid told her priest, her confessor, that she was having such a bad consciousness because she had baptized this kid, which now was Catholic, and he was living among Jews. So the church took care of that, and one night came into this Mortara family. Mortara is a typical Jewish Italian last name, and kidnapped the boy. And again, this is not the Middle Ages. This was, very, very well into the 19th century, almost the 20th. Many people intervened, including Napoleon III and, very important figures of the history of the time, but nothing worked. The boy grew up to be first a priest and then even a cardinal, became a very important person. People might joke that like if Jews do something, even being Catholic, they do it very well. So he became an important cardinal. He died, as you saw, in 1940, so right at the beginning of World War II, in Liège, in Belgium. He never ever went back to Judaism. This is a very sad picture of his mother and father visiting him. For some time, he was, sort of faithful to his faith. He continued to say Shema Israel, he told his mother on one visit, until he became like a very involved Christian and died as a Catholic cardinal. This was probably one of the most crazy stories of anti-Semitism in, pre-modern Italy. Today, the reason I'm mentioning this story is that today there is a movie which is being written by a British historian, David Kreutzer, and the book, the movie was first bought. The rights were bought by Steven Spielberg, who then decided to give it up to someone else. So the movie is now being done not by Steven Spielberg, but it will be out soon. So stay tuned if you are interested in this very sad story. This is something I was referring to earlier, which was 1870, Rome is conquered. So it's finally not the city of the Pope anymore, but it's unified with the rest of Italy. What happens is that good Christian would go and take Rome. And legend goes that the first person to break into Rome and to conquer it from this gate of Porta Pia was a Jewish soldier, a Jewish official even. This is a little bit of family history. This fellow here, Rabbi Donato Camerini, was my great-grandfather, my father's grandfather, or my grandfather's father, and he lived in Parma. These are his dates, 1866, 1921. He had 14 children. He was the rabbi of several communities in the area of Bologna, Parma, Modena, Reggio. This is all central northern Italy. And he was a scholar, and he happened to live in this small city of Parma, which happened to have a very important, still does, library, la Biblioteca Palatina. So in a time before Google and JSTOR and many other devices, he was in constant communication with many scholars around the world, from Europe to the land of Israel to America, who asked them to check manuscripts and all sorts of books that he had access to in the library, and they didn't. So his letters and records are very rich from all the intensive exchanges that he had with people around the world. Thanks to the library that he had access to. The first rabbinical school in Italy was founded, the first yeshiva, the first place to form rabbis was found in Padua, which is also a city next to Venice. In 1871, then it was moved to Florence, then to Torino, which had then become the capital of Italy, and then to Rome, where it is still today. I'm going to skip these few things. This is a whole other story about the involvement of Jewish people in the Risorgimento, in the struggles to make Italy unified and kick out the Austrians and the Pope and the French and all of that. Again, I've dedicated an entire show to this topic. It's very, very, rich and dense. So now nations, Austria, Germany, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and so on and so forth, France, Jews were very, very keen to become part of their nation. So again, they were very involved and gave their lives and their talents and their energies for their countries. This is a prayer which I found in a prayer book in a siddur, belonged to some members of my father's family. The prayer was written by a rabbi that came from Galicia in Poland, Rabbi Marguliec, who became the director of the rabbinical school in Florence. So this is a beautiful tefillah, beautiful prayer. You have it here in Hebrew and in Italian, and basically it was written for Jewish soldiers. Special is that they were not only asking the Lord to come home, safe and alive and not wounded or anything, but also they were asking not to have to kill or harm anyone, which is a very interesting approach to war when you think of it for a soldier. This is what Italy looked like in 1861 after it was unified. Rome is finally the capital. Florence is a very important city. Milan, Turin, Bologna. These are some of the places that I've been mentioning. You see here is Venice. Padua is just here, and so on and so forth. By now, as I said, Jews are almost no one is living in the south, except this is a crazy story. So if we go back to the map here on the Adriatic Sea, on this little thing here, a crazy community starts. So this man here with a mustache called Donato Manduzio is a farmer at the beginning of the story. He's a very poor, ignorant peasant, non-Jewish, who goes to World War I. He's wounded at a leg. He comes home, he cannot work, he cannot walk, he cannot do anything. He has to stay in bed. And a Methodist pastor gives him a Bible. Now you need to think that because of the Catholic Church, people were not reading the Bible. The Bible was only available in Latin. It was not translated into Italian because the church did not want people, not Jews, people in general, to have any access to the Bible. So people could not read the Bible. They had to hear it from the priest in Latin and then just have whatever translated, in the way that the priest wanted to translate it. Of course, this was a form of control. So what happens is that all the Reformed churches, the Protestant churches, the Methodists, the Baptists, all of that, they had Bibles in the local languages. So this fellow Manduzio receives a Bible that he can sort of understand in Italian, but he does not understand much because he becomes convinced to be the last surviving Jew. He becomes convinced that the Jews were the people who were destroyed in the flood, in Noah's flood, which is actually even before the Jewish people existed. It's before Abraham. And he keeps having dreams on him being a new Moses, a new Noah, a new Jewish leader. And he's so charismatic that a whole community goes with him. And basically it becomes the Jewish community of this tiny, crazy town of San Nicandro Gargano, a very small village on the mountains on the Adriatic Sea. What happens is that at the end of World War II, among many other Jews who, become connected to Judaism again after the war, receive help from the Joint, from American Jewish organizations, from early Zionist organizations. The Jews of San Nicandro become part of that, are formally converted and circumcised and everything. Some of them make Aliyah and go and live in Israel, where they still are today. There are two communities of San Nicandro. One is in the north, next to Safed, to Tzfat, and the other one is in the south, next to Beersheba. And some of them are still there. I visited them. I spent a Shabbat with them about 7 years ago. There is a book written by a British historian, John Davis, about the story of the Jews of San Nicandro. This is the Italian version, but the original version of the book is in English, so you can easily find it. Davis. This is the Achnasat Sefer Torah, where they gave a Sefer Torah, a scroll of the Torah, to this tiny community. And if I can, I will play some song for you. Let's see.
Fior di bel fiore, guardiamo il firmamento come bello, l'ha disteso tutto il creatore, fior di bel fiore. Fiore di gemme, manda a noi cacciatori, che ci ritornerà in Gerusalemme, fiore di gemme. Fiore di canna, noi siamo i discendenti di Abramo.
Okay, so I don't know if you could catch any of the words, but basically this is a song, a very simple peasant song from that area of southern Italy. So nothing Jewish about the relationship between local music and Jewish text. The words have been adapted to talk about the story of Abraham. The last verse that I played, it talks about Abraham that was sent away from Canaan, La Canaana, and everything rhymes with stuff from the nature. So it's a bit like in the song, I don't know, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, right? So there are all these things in folk music that have to do with nature and plants and flowers, but they are adapted to rhyme with biblical themes and religious stories. I want to see what's in the chat. 1 second. Yeah, so Chabad in Venice, yes. Okay, great. Yes, I will talk about Chabad a little bit later if we have time. So I just feel like skipping through. Okay, so what happened in 1938, we all know. Mussolini publishes the Manifesto per la difesa della razza, which is the very first draft of the racial laws against the Jews. What you see here in color is, I think some of you might recognize it, it's a scene from Life is Beautiful, La Vita Bella, the famous movie with Benigni. And I don't know. Okay, this is what we already heard about the Seder Pesach. So, okay, that we've done. So, of course, Jews are expelled from schools, universities, public offices, government. I'm also, of course, talking about the story of my own family. All my grandparents were in Italy at the time of the war. My two grandmothers were kicked out of high school, and very quickly, the Jewish communities, one of my grandmothers was in Genova on the Northwest Sea, and my other grandmother was in Milan. So very quickly, the Jewish communities established Jewish schools so that their kids could finish school and their teachers could teach there. Actually, they were very good schools because there were so many teachers who were kicked out of universities that, professors that came from universities to teach in the Jewish high school. So actually, the quality was very good. My maternal grandfather was already a doctor, and he suffered enormously from being kicked out of a hospital, and he had some friend who offered him to still treat patients like privately, semi-clandestine. And then when the real war broke up, and in 1943, the Germans invaded Italy and started actually deporting the Jews who were not, Italy was not an allied country anymore. All of my family fled into different directions. Some of my grandparents went to Switzerland, crossed the border by night, and very difficult circumstances. Choose Gentiles that we later, recognized and awarded the prizes to. And of course, the stories of all of us who are here to tell the stories are the stories of the people who were saved, and everyone else is not even here to tell the stories. And I think this is something that is always very important to keep in mind when we talk about it, because everyone else we don't hear. 1946, Italy was liberated. As in many other places in France and all around Europe, all the survivors, so many orphan Jewish kids needed to be put together again, brought back to some sort of health and life, and put on a ship to either North America if they had any family there, or more often Palestine. So these are some of the homes, the big houses where this happened. This one is in Cesopoli, which is near Bergamo in the north of Italy. This used to be basically like a summer camp for for children of fascist, machers, big people of the fascist party. And so very interestingly, after the war, it was turned into sort of a achshara, a kibbutz, a place where Jewish kids were sent to sort of prepare for life in Palestine. So you see, this is a postcard from there for Rosh Hashanah of 1947, wishing Tova, a good year. Cesopoli was the name of the place. Cesa was a hero of fascism. There is a clip from a movie that I wanted to show you, but I don't think we have time to do that. So I will send it and you can watch it after. This is a beautiful picture of a Purim spiel, speaking of Purim, that happened there and make them fit to life and to live again. So I really love this picture, full of life. I mentioned before the Vatican Council, 1962, 1965, it was probably one of the most important things that happened in the relationship between Jews and Italy, Jews and the Christian Catholic Church. This, of course, is the Basilica of St. Peter in Rome. And you can see many men here, cardinals, whatever they are. Basically, in this council, they decided, among many other things, that Jesus is Jewish and is Jewish forever. We completely changed the policy and the attitude towards Jewish communities since then until now. So whatever interfaith activity I do today, I'm very active in the interfaith dialogue world, is highly charged by the deep interest that the Christian church has for Jews in Italy, today. I see a question. When were Jews first in Italy? So as I mentioned earlier, there is already a mention of Jews in Italy even before the destruction of the Second Temple. So that would be the 1st century CE, AD, if that answers the question of Judy. But you can tell me if you need more details, if I have them. I don't know. This is a sad fact. In 1982, a young boy was shot outside the synagogue of Rome by a terrorist. And there is a plaque that remembers. I mean, of course, this was not the last act of terrorism and anti-Semitic fact in Italy, but it was a very big one. It was widely remembered. In the same decade, 1986, the historical meeting between Pope John Paul II and the very big Rabbi Elio Toath happened in the synagogue in Rome. It was the very first time in 2000 years that a pope visited a synagogue. And of course, it was part of this atmosphere of reconciliation and the aftermath of the Holocaust. Something I mentioned before, the signing of this contract between the Jewish communities and the state. Tulia Zevi was a woman, president of the Union of Jewish Communities. The guy standing there is not Berlusconi, but someone that looks like him. And here we come a little bit to my activities, which also are part of this story in a way. So in 2013 and 14, I was part of a team of people who organized in Milan a very, very, very big Jewish festival called Jewish and the City. I know the name sounds a little funny in English, but malasat. So what we did, it was dedicated, the first edition was dedicated to Shabbat, the Sabbath, and the second one on 14 was on Pesach. So basically what I did was I wrote the script for a gigantic Seder. What you see here in the picture is more than 1,000 people sitting at a gigantic table. It's my mother's nightmare to have 1,000 people over for the Seder. That was largely based on the Haggadah. And we have 12 actresses that were moving like a clock. The place where this is happening is very round. It used to be a hospital in the Renaissance. It was built by Leonardo da Vinci in the center of Milan. So basically the idea was of a 12 places clock marking the passing of time. And I know the name of the performance was what has changed. The time passes and meets us in different places, and we ask, we changed. So this was just one thing. Another one is something that I've been doing for the last 10 years. It's called Lo Shabbat di Tutti, everyone's Shabbat. So this is a Shabbat dinner. It started in Mantova, the same city that I was telling you about for Salomone Rossi, the composer. Today, Mantova, in this festival, basically what we did was like a gigantic Shabbat dinner where I tell people about Shabbat, I read literature about Shabbat, and we play music and songs of Shabbat. This is a project that we have been taking everywhere in Italy, Switzerland, Israel, Germany, and so on and so forth. We have a few more dates coming up now. And these are just different occasions in which we did the same thing. This is another show of mine that does not have anything to do with Italian Jewry. It is actually a Yiddish play about the workers in Poland, Lithuania, Russia. It's called Messiah and Revolution. We go back to the story of the Messiah. This was a performance we had right before COVID in the Milan State University. It's also a show that is still running with Yiddish songs about the Bund. This is a book. Actually, I have the book here, so I can show it after when I stop sharing my screen. It's a book that I wrote about food and religions. So it's not about Jewish food. The picture I'm showing in the picture is about cholent. The illustrations are actually very beautiful. They were made by a French, Jewish, Swiss, Belgian artist called Jean Blanchard. And the recipes were written by two cooks who have a beautiful website of Italian Jewish cuisine. And I wrote the stories. So it's 45, it's a collection of 45 stories of recipes or dishes that come from religious precepts, obligations, prohibitions. So it's about Jews, Christians, Muslims, and it was a big project. It has been translated so far only in German. So it exists in Italian and in German. If you know any publisher who might be willing to do it in English, I'll be happy to be in touch about it. This is the book. And I think this is it. Yes. Yes. This is back to us.
Do we have any questions? That was a great history, and it made me want to eat those fried artichokes, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since you showed that picture. Do you want to, I mean, we can, if you want to talk about the Chabad now, there's no other questions.
Just took the actual book from the shelf here. So this is what the book looks like. I have a few favorite recipes. I'm happy to talk about them too if we still have time and interest. Chabad, yeah, I mean, Chabad is the same, I think, in many places. So Mira wrote to us, when I visited the Venice Ghetto in 2001, I was struck by the fact that Chabad kept entirely separate from the small groups struggling to maintain and run the old ghetto. No money helped. Is the situation different now? So I feel like today they are two different worlds still. The Jewish community of Venice actually is not doing well, as in they don't have many people nor much money, but I've been working with them a lot also very recently on a project that has to do with food, Dafka. We did a big Shabbat di Tutti dinner just a few months ago there. There are, unfortunately, many Israelis come, or I mean, maybe say Israeli is not fair. Tourists, bichlal, it's easier for them to go to Chabad because they speak English or Hebrew. They offer free meals. They are, they are Ashkenazim, so people will find themselves more comfortable with the davening, with the tefillah. I think in the end, it's everyone's effort to, try and go somewhere a little further from what we know. So the more we are all willing to make an effort and go local, the easier. Like I blamed myself the first time I visited New Orleans for doing the exact same thing. Like me and a friend were super excited about spending Shabbat in a real New Orleans synagogue and with the community as struggling as old as it was. And then this Chabad guy came along and it was like, why don't you come to us? And we'll set you up somewhere. You save money on hotel and food. And then we regretted because it's the same. So I feel like everywhere you go, you can just decide to go local and help the Jewish local communities survive. Those are my 2 cents about it.
Any other questions? We're so quiet today. I think the rain may have washed away everyone's questions.
Yeah, hi, I have a question for you. It's Richard. Can you share anything about the Jews of Torino?
Yeah. So I do. You are right that it's not something that I've been researching so much. It's a little random, because this is such a huge topic that is impossible to do everything in 1 hour and 1 hour and a half. So I did actually chose to keep that part of the story a little out. Do you have any family connection to that? Do you have any specific interest? Any, special connection to Torino? Primo Levi? I don't know. Anything.
Yeah, actually, it's my wife. Her father was from Turin, so
I
just
see.
curious to know.
And what's the name of the family?
Lascar.
Yeah. So I actually know Laura Lascar from Tunisian name.
Really?
Lascar, yeah. I mean, of course, it's an Ashkenazi name. It's people who came from somewhere in Ashkenaz at some point to Torino, right? It doesn't sound like an Italian last name. You realize that. But still, it's it's people who might have lived there for 100 years or more. Yeah. I mean, Torino was one of the examples of the cities where Jews were very much part of the city. They were middle class. They were usually pretty wealthy. Many of them were professors or intellectuals or artists. Again, I think we all know and read Primo Levi, which was the Jew from Torino, and the most famous Holocaust survivor from Italy for sure. It was caught as a partisan because also many Jews in Torino were very, very, very left wing. So it was part of the partisans, and that's how it was captured, which of course for him, it was extra dangerous to be a partisan because he was then deported not as a partisan, but as a Jew. And he only survived because he was a chemist. So he worked in a lab instead of in a slavery camp. There are many other figures of very interesting Turin Jews. Another Levi, not related, Carlo Levi, who wrote a beautiful book called, in Italian, it's called Cristo si è fermato a Eboli. It's the book that tells the story of his year and some more months that he spent. This was something that the fascists did at the beginning of their regime, which was to send everyone that was dangerous for its political views and activism somewhere far, like the Russians would send people to Siberia. So they would send people to very remote cities in southern Italy. So that's what happened to this guy, Carlo Levi, if you ever want to read something about it.
The father ended up after the war, he ended up going to Palestine. And then worked his way to America.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yes.
Any other questions? No. All right. Well,
AJ.
AJ, thank you.
AJ has a question.
Go ahead, AJ.
I'm curious about the garment trade in the late medieval period.
You did, thank you.
And I don't know if you can hear me now or not.
I can. I also hear someone else. So I would ask maybe everyone else to mute, maybe.
Okay. There was a triangle of trade between Barcelona and Marseille and the west coast of Italy. You mentioned your grandmother was in Genoa.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the centers, but I also read that Jews were banned from that area. So I'm wondering, can you speak a little bit about that history and Jewish involvement in general in the weaving trade? And I guess there's a specialization in velvet that was very popular at the end of the medieval period. What was the connection there, and how were Jews involved in the garment industry back when it was done by hand?
Right. So I think that Jews were involved in the garment industry as much as it happened in, other parts of Central Europe and, Poland, all the schmattes that came to New York as well. Just because it was a trade that involved traveling and transporting things from one place to another and have like weaving, if we want to use this metaphor, weaving relationships between one place and another, which of course Jews were very good at. So it goes from, banks to much lower social classes with garment. Genova was definitely a big center for that. The trousers that we wear, the jeans, come from Genova, right? So that was a big thing. And definitely Marseille and Genova were very well connected because we're nearby ports. I think that Jews, more than being involved with velvet, as far as I know, were very involved with silk. Some of my grandmother's cousins were silk farmers, if you can call that. So they had the actual worms that made silk up on the Lake Como, which was one of the main places for the production of silk. It still is. And they fled Italy in 1938 and established themselves in South America. So until today, part of their family lives between Colombia and Ecuador, and then they moved to Florida. So some of that family now lives in Florida. But until 1938, they were silk producers on the Lake Como, for example.
Anyone else?
Another question for you, if I would. Good. If we wanted to find out more about the Jews of Italy in terms of, I guess you could say genealogy, and to find out more about roots and stuff, is there a website that we could you could suggest?
I would just consult the general website of the Beth at Futsot of the Diaspora Museum, the one in Tel Aviv, and go under the Italian branch, because I think that most information, rather than being on some Italian archive, is at the Beth at Futsot. You know what I'm talking about, right? The Diaspora Museum?
Yes, I do. I do know it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
So I do not think that there is anything specific, like anything specifically that is like run by the Italian communities or anything like that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you again, Miriam. This was an amazing talk. For those of you who are interested, Miriam will share some more of those videos and whatnot with me, and I will make sure that you all get them. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Miriam, have a great evening. And we will see you all next week, or next month, rather, for our talk on the Jews of Ireland. So keeping it in Europe. So I look forward to seeing you all then, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Grazie.
Thank you. Grazie a voi.